Greetings and welcome, Diocese of California. Bonjour, mes cousins. This is Eric Metoyer. I am Deputy to Convention for the Diocese of California, giving a shout out to my folks at St. Francis Episcopal Church in San Francisco, my home parish, where I serve as rector. At the convention, I am a deputy to the floor. We are here to represent the Diocese of California, and also as deputies, we vote our conscience on all the resolutions that come to us. I also have a somewhat enhanced role, dare I say that, as the chairperson of Legislative Committee 11, which is the Committee for Evangelism and Church Planting. So there were resolutions, essentially legislation that came across our desk, myself and 17 other members of the House of Deputies, for review, processing, amending, to further send on to the floor of the House for a vote, or a vote on consent. And this is one of those committees that has two things. One, we are considered a committee of first action. And the second is that we work with the House of Bishops. So that's who I am, and that's what I do. And I'm here in beautiful Baltimore. So thank you for inviting me.
So what are some of the resolutions that have been most interesting to you as you work on in your committee, working on evangelism and church planting, and thinking about how they might relate to our diocese?
So great question. So I'll just run through the five. So we had 5 resolutions that came to us. There are the 3 original resolutions. One, and I'll just give the short versions of them. 2 of them were based on building new communities, essentially church planting, and revitalizing church communities, church revitalization. A095 was committed to new communities, A096 to church revitalization. What was interesting about A095 is that not only was there funding, and I was on a task force that reviewed those funding grants, but the focus this year for the next 2 years is on building new communities. So reaching out to otherwise marginalized communities, communities of sexual orientation, communities of color, communities of people who are outside our Episcopal Church world, marginalized communities, whether by economic or by geographic location, or even focus, such as our farm community in Brentwood. So those 2 are originally with us, as well as another one, which doesn't affect us, but is one we should be aware of, which is supporting the 2 remaining Episcopal Church historic Black colleges and universities, Voorhees and St. Augustine's. The Episcopal Church, after Reconstruction, actually funded a number of liberal arts colleges and training schools, some half dozen or so, of which only 2 still survive. So that was a church-wide commitment at that time, and we ensured that their chaplains would be paid, and that they would be part of our pension program, which was something that was not so before. We also picked up 2 other resolutions. One, which is interesting, is digital evangelism. Part of this post-COVID world is learning how to do what we're doing now, which is Zoom. So to fund and create structure of studying what we've been stumbling over, dare I say, over the past 2 years of what do we do with Zoom, what do we do with Facebook Live, with YouTube Live, and so on, and think about how this could be true evangelism for the church. So that's one of them. There was some funding attached to that, always good to have money. And the other one is endowing evangelism for the church. It was an important shift because normally we look at evangelism as something that's out of our budget. We think of our parish budget, oh, we're going to leave $50,000 each year for church outreach. But this is creating an endowment. So raising money so that there's always money involved for evangelism. It's a slightly different way of looking at it, but it's a long-term strategy of how do we build the body of Christ in our world and have the funding for it. So fascinating work. And I am rather partial to it, I gotta admit.
Thank you for talking to us about these important resolutions that you have been working for about 2-3 years already. That sometimes people don't understand the importance of what these resolutions do to our church and our community. So how will you encourage people to pay attention to what's happening during General Convention? I know a lot of people say, oh, it's very long and it gets boring, but the importance of General Convention goes beyond our local communities. It also goes to even to our government, and it helps us as we move forward as a church and as a country as well.
So for our diocese, the most important thing to me of church governance is that we are not Congregationalists. We are part of something wider that's known as the Episcopal Church. We have a lot of congregations that only think, I go to St. John's, I go to St. Swithin's, and that's the only way they see the church. And in our diocese, they might see themselves somewhat connected through their deanery or something, but they don't really feel fully connected from Redwood City to Marin City, let's say. So this helps us realize that we, as Episcopalians, we are connected to the worldwide Anglican Communion. 150,000 feet, 50,000 feet, we're connected to the wider Episcopal Church. And through tracking through the work that the two of you are doing of connecting us with the diocesan folks, our DioCal people here, we are connected to that wider church. I mean, to stand up, rather, I didn't stand up, I sat down and listened to the deputies from Puerto Rico explain why they are part of the United States in Spanish. And therefore they should be part of Province 2, the central part of the Atlantic seashore, and not as part of the countries of the Caribbean. It's a subtle but incredibly important difference. And you mentioned in our wider national conversation, if you remember the conversation about the hurricane that wiped out large amounts of Puerto Rico, a lot of the news coverage treated it as a foreign country. It is us. We are part of Puerto Rico and vice versa. There's no passport involved, but we treat it because it's a Spanish-speaking dominion of the United States that it's separate. It was important for them to know, for the wider church, that they are part of us. That to me is part of that connection of not only the wider church, but wider events happening around the world that are important for us to understand as part of the Episcopal Church. I hope that answered the question.
You heard a very important sermon this morning by the Bishop of Maryland about, well, it was about a lot of things, but one of the major topics was reparations and the Episcopal Church's responsibility to lean into that and do some really hard things that financially could be quite painful. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that example may affect all of us?
So first off, I want to recommend and highly commend everyone to listen to Bishop Sutton's sermon. And I'm sure that we've got a link to it. You must listen to the whole sermon. My takeaway of that sermon, Bishop Sutton was talking about the work, rather the legacy of the Episcopal Church in Maryland and the need for reparations, of recognizing that for those who haven't tracked your history, Maryland is a slave state. In 1860, Union troops occupied Baltimore to ensure that it was a border state that remained within the federal union. Slavery is alive and well in Maryland, and the legacy of slavery is there. Episcopal churches were built by enslaved people, funded by slave owners, and there is a wonderful documentary on a church whose name I can't, Memorial Church in Baltimore, where their recently assigned deacon, God bless her, found out that her family was enslaved by the founders of that church. This is our Episcopal Church legacy. However we want to try to dice our way around it, it is our legacy. And what Bishop Sutton was talking about was we need to know the truth. We need to live into the truth. The truth will not kill us, but Jesus tells us to live into the truth. The truth will set us free. So we need to know that truth. And what very much struck me was that we are all, reparations frees all of us. It's not so much that it's, I'm walking down the street, I'm going to give everybody $5 and that's going to be it. It's repairing a broken relationship to build a relationship again. Walking around, it's reconciliation, like Martin Smith said, in the most basic sense. Walk around and saying, I forgive you and leaving is not repairing a relationship. That's just saying, I'm taking whatever, the sin that I caused you, I'm just saying it's over and I walk away, but it doesn't say what I did to you. It's a one-way conversation. This is now a two-way conversation. And was it $1 million a year he committed for 5 years? I remember one of you mentioned that you remember the number. I can't remember if it was $500,000 or $1 million. I'm hoping it was $1 million, but it was a significant amount of money out of the bottom line of their budget. They said is going to repair the relationship, directly invested into minority communities, communities of color in the city of Baltimore, inside the diocese, Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Albemarle, the counties that were affected by the Episcopal Church, where the Episcopal Church gleaned its trust funds, its wealth, its churches off the back of enslaved peoples, and continued to do so afterwards. We need to know our history and live into it and recognize that a broken relationship cannot be repaired unless there is some recognition on both sides that harm needs to be remedied, harm needs to be recognized, and forgiveness had. And there was a couple of things that he said. One thing, or two things that really hit me. Sometimes the truth hurts, but it will set you free. And this work may hurt, and frankly, it should. If we're giving, if that $1 million isn't coming out of a bottom line, if it's $1 million out of $1 billion, it's lunch money. It shouldn't be lunch money. It should be dinner. It should be a lobster dinner every day of the week, enough that it's significant and we recognize that we're actually doing some good. But the other thing that really, really struck me is what he said at towards the very end. He said, we swim in the waters of racism and fish do not know they are wet. We don't see it, but we recognize it. And a line that I remember hearing from The Warmth of Other Suns was, when you buy a house that's broken, you don't blame somebody else and never fix it. You got to fix the roof. You got to fix the roof. Sisters and brothers, this is what we do. So it was a remarkable sermon, and it's actually inspiring of thinking about what can we do? Where did our church money come from? Not just the work we did pre-Civil War, but throughout our California history. Where did our money come from? The railroads, the banks, the farms, the times that Californians wiped out Asian communities to take the land, the covenants that are written into our houses. When we got a house in San Francisco, I went looking into the deed to find out if it was covenanted land, that the house could not be sold to Mexicans, Negroes, and Malay. They are still in the deeds of the houses we buy in St. Francis Wood, in parts of Berkeley, in Montclair and Oakland. They're just not, they're now null and void, but that's because a court at one point said so. That may change. To repair that breach is our Christian call. Here ended the lesson. I'm coming off the soapbox.
As we reach the end of General Convention, and I know tomorrow is the last day, what have been your biggest takeaways, and what are some things you think the church needs to work on?
My biggest takeaways. So one of the most amazing events on the church floor, there was a resolution on the consent calendar, which, so very quickly, consent calendar are all the resolutions that decided that, just like in our diocesan convention, we're just going to pass all of them on an up-down yes/no vote. We don't discuss them. So there was a resolution on funding the study and to have reparations with the American Indian, the indigenous community over Native schools. We've heard a lot about the horrors of the Native schools in Canada. Well, the Episcopal Church also sponsored them. In historic Sioux territory, historic Navajo and Paiute territory, we were part of this. We just don't know the story. So to hear the stories from our cousins in the indigenous community talk about going to those schools and what happened to them, what happened to their forebearers, they pulled that off the consent calendar, which had some of us saying, oh, now we have more bills to talk through. But it was for them to give witness and tell their story. Probably one of the most amazing moments that made me feel proud being an Episcopalian, that we faced our fear. We faced and sat to be judged by what we failed to do. That's living into the truth. The truth will set us free. Coming into the end of convention, it's been a very quick convention. This should be about 14 days, and we're doing, right now, we are actually meeting in the House to go through legislation. 3 sessions of at least 3 hours, sometimes 5, sometimes 2, every day to go through the legislation. It's amazing to see it work. And I think the most other important, amazing thing was the president of the House of Deputies. This is her last convention. She's been there for 3 3-year terms, plus this bonus year. The love of the House for her was incredible. Multiple standing ovations, but just out of respect, and even more so that, and I am a beneficiary of this, she dedicated her 9 years of raising up new voices from new parts of the church, raising up younger deputies, encouraging younger deputies, encouraging people like myself. I'm a 3-time deputy, but as a first-time deputy, I was appointed to the State of the Church Committee, which now Chris Rankin-Williams is the off-going chair, of getting people who were not part of that church establishment. The outsiders came in. And I think it really shows that Julia Ayala Harris, who I don't know her age, but clearly she's under the average age of 65 in the church, is now the president of House of Deputies. It's that next generation and encouraging that next generation. And I think that's been the most important thing to see, with the number of first-time deputies and the number of, dare I say, younger Episcopalians taking part in the governance of the church. It's a beautiful thing. I have hope for the church.
Any final thoughts or funny stories you want to tell about Baltimore before we let you go?
So I'm sure other speakers will be speaking about that you can't walk 1 block without running to someplace selling you a crab cake, or someone trying to sell you a crab cake, which I happen to love. Baltimore crab, soft shell crab, and a natty bohemian and French fries is a meal to me. But we've got seafood in San Francisco, I gotta admit, which I rather like. So it's interesting to be in that. It's interesting that our hotels in the convention center is right next door to the baseball park. It's like getting situated south of the slot next to AT&T Park or Oracle Park, whatever they call it now, but that's where our convention is. So and it's a home stretch for the Baltimore Orioles. So games are every night. But for me, it's coming back to the East Coast and finding pineapple orange crush. In healthy California, you do not have sugar-coated seltzer products. This is probably a $5 tax in the city and county of San Francisco. And it comes in watermelon, raspberry, and purple, which I think is grape. It's not sure, it just says crush. but it just reminds me of my days of seeing relatives in Washington, D.C. and getting catfish and fries and sweet tea and all these things that you'd never find in Marin County or San Francisco County, but it's hometown food. The other great thing is just seeing the church at work and seeing again friends from the diocese, 113 dioceses of the Episcopal Church. Some 14 of them are from outside the continental United States, and seeing how the church works and seeing how people are just genuinely glad to see each other, especially after 2 years of COVID. So I encourage everyone to tune into the DioCal Convention channel and see which part of the work of the church from the other deputies that might interest you. Get involved, ask us any questions, invite us to your churches. We're happy to talk to you about what we do. And maybe even run for convention, or even more so, reach out and think of how you can help our wider international church become truly the Jesus movement and be disciples of the Christ.
Amen to that. Thank you so much, Reverend Eric. We wish you luck on the rest of your time at Baltimore, and we'll see you soon back in San Francisco.
Thank you, friends. So good to see you again. Brothers and sisters of the diocese, good to see you. We'll be back soon enough. Take care.
Bye.